Dung dung ding 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 ding. This is the what is this? This is the Stay Sassy Podcast, episode 3. We're off to a rough start. What's up, Sassy PM?
Not too much. Things are good. Labor Day is over. Back at work. Can't wait for the all these AI agents to come and do my job so that I don't have to labor anymore, which is I think the topic for today.
Indeed, we're finally going to talk about AI on episode 3 of our podcast. We've been shit posting about it on Twitter. We got a couple blog posts about it. It is the topic of the century, and we are going to talk about it today. For today, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to just give a few each hot takes on AI. Maybe they're not hot takes, maybe they're lukewarm, maybe we're just glorified boomers here shouting into the ether. But in any case, we're going to try not to just talk about random stuff and, using AI for, personal finance or something like that. We're going to try to talk about kind of bigger themes and things that we think are maybe the most interesting point in time trends that we are seeing. So Sassy PM, do you have some hot takes locked and loaded? I think we're gonna go back and forth, one each, and kind of see where we get here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest one that, not the biggest one, but the one that I'm thinking about the most is just like the fact that really all people are not the same in terms of their ability to like process change and process new information. I think that we, just like many other companies, are in this situation where you have kind of a strong push to use AI to get more efficient, to get more creative, to do more faster at everyone's jobs. And one of the things that I really observe very, very strongly is the fact that you've just got some departments and some types of folks who move much, much quicker with AI than others. Like I think if you look at product managers, so I'm a product manager, I manage product managers. If you look at them, they are very, very like AI curious, AI aggressive, trying to use it all over the place, and they're using it in very, very different ways. But if you look at there's a lot of other folks out there. I mean, if you work in HR, if you work in finance, if you work in law, the law doesn't change that much. These are largely status quo maintaining roles. And I think that there's this idea of like AI is going to change everything and you've got to fear for your job. It's like that's not really true for a lot of people. It's very, very true for people who are in these sorts of functions where they do not naturally think about how things change and they naturally think about the things that are going to stay the same. I think a lot of folks are just going to get run over because we're now multiple years into this AI wave, and I'm seeing people where it's like it's almost like the first day that they've heard about this stuff. And even if they're using, say, ChatGPT like fairly regularly in their lives, it's like their thinking on it hasn't evolved at all because they just don't tend to think in ways that lead them to kind of novelty in the same way. And I think those folks should actually be very, very worried. And there's a mindset shift that is going to hit them really, really hard.
Yeah, do you think it has anything to do with sort of like, I guess some jobs are more they are naturally more defensive and some are more offensive. So I feel like
Mhm.
law, maybe support, security, stuff like that, they're naturally more my job is to sort of is to minimize a bad thing instead of optimize a good thing. And I think that at least lately I'm seeing the people that are thinking about how do I make these numbers go up and they're starving to do that, like PMs, are very optimistic on saying, give me more of this stuff. And I think people who are have these more defensive kind of roles, first of all, I think they're incentivized to not even imagine a world where everything goes to zero, because then what do you need these people for? But then also, I think it just is a shift of sort of how bullish you are on creatively thinking about what you could leverage these tools for.
I think it's totally that. And like, everyone knows that there's gatekeeper functions. Like I didn't even mention compliance because I don't really interact with compliance teams very often, but that's like the classic, most extreme case of this. But I think that in a lot of cases, those sorts of job functions have not really been they've been very, very safe. The world's been fairly static, but I think that that's changing very, very dramatically. And I also think the underlying point of what I'm trying to say is like those job functions attract a certain personality type. And I think that that personality type is about to get smashed by a bulldozer. And if you are in that sort of job function, I think it's really important right now to look in a mirror and be like, am I here because I love things that are the status quo? Because if so, it's like if ever there was a time to push on your comfort zone, like it's today.
I think that's right. And I think that also there's a like any role, it's there's a distribution of people in those roles that are more like the norm of that role and more, to one side or the other. And I think it's a place where we could see dramatic differentiation between companies based on if you have people or a leader in those roles who really embrace the future. I think IT is another one where IT, I think, is maybe the silent hero or enemy of many AI transformations in terms of, you know, how loose can you be with, acquiring new technology and how many things can you experiment with and how big is your process and all of that. And so I think it's one of these things where I generally agree that different roles have different persona types, and they attract different kinds of, risk sort of profiles. I think that I probably also agree that that means certain things for how those cohorts are going to fare with technology waves like AI. But I also think it's if you're one of those people, like you're saying, this is like a moment, a career defining moment where you could, ride a trend of technology and become, a massively outsized impact on a company and on your career.
For sure. What about you? What are your hot takes?
Yeah, I have a list here that I was thinking about, and I don't know how skeptical I want to start, but I'll start with this one, which is that I think more than ever, for productivity's sake, having patterns that are detectable and reproducible in your code are really important so that you can then go and safely add to those patterns and build more functionality. And I think we're already seeing that that means that there's a consolidation in design systems and coding languages, and just the more normal you are, the more standard you are, the better the LLM can then pattern match to the next thing that that standard thing should be doing. And I think that for many use cases, that's amazing. If you're like a workday or something like that, you don't need to have extremely exotic functionality in your dashboard. And so there's going to be this whole wave of SaaS that comes through that uses super similar technology, has super similar UI and UX, and that's fine. That'll be great. We'll finally have a world where engineers and PMs don't have to spend oodles amounts of time creating CRUD apps that look the same in different languages. That has been sort of, an economic driver of these industries for a long time. And they'll be able to do higher level things. And I broadly believe in Jevons paradox and that they'll find other things to do. So I think that'll be great. I think my hot take is it's going to create a blandness that is so widespread that it's going to create a void that everyone is going to be building in black and white. And someone's going to come through and say, I have decided as a business that we are not going to just copy pasta everybody else's languages or design systems or whatever. We're going to do something different. And it's going to fucking feel like someone turned the TV on to color all of a sudden. And it is going to become a massively successful business. And so I think we're going to see these cohorts of broader industry adoption of highly standard boilerplate, cookie cutter kind of apps, and that'll be fine. I think that will create a premium on things that don't look like that. And I don't think everyone will be able to do it. I don't think everyone should do it. But I think one of the top 20 software companies of the next 50 years is going to be a company where everyone else is doing churn out as fast as you can, standard SaaS looking SaaS apps, and they're gonna go, fuck that. We're doing something that we cannot stand doing another standard CRUD, design system, 3 pixel here is what everyone does. They're gonna do it differently, and it's gonna feel so fucking good to be in that application. Users are gonna be overjoyed by just how different it is. And a lot of people are going to try to emulate that once that happens, but I think that that will be a void that will need filling as we get more quickly developed standard looking applications. People still want to enjoy the software that they use. There's still a desire to have custom, bespoke, great technology and products. And I think that that will be something where somebody will see that and they'll go, willfully and intentionally, we are not doing all this other stuff. We're doing something that looks like color where everyone else is doing black and white as fast as they can.
Yep. Yeah, it's someone's gonna make like the I don't know, maybe this isn't a good analogy, but like the Aman hotels or whatever of of software, just like kind of be much more artisanal, be much more of a craftsperson about the whole thing, and ultimately that's a way to differentiate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another idea that is sort of related to that I've been bouncing around is this idea of kind of like what's the designer of the future? Because I've also got this, I think that one of the interesting things that's going to be possible once you have, like you're saying, the standardization and the frameworks, like design teams that I know, like, the design team that I manage has spent a very large amount of time in the past designing a very comprehensive design system and framework that we can use for like a shared language across the entirety of quite a sprawling enterprise product. And I think that's exactly the type of system that AI is incredibly effective at using and deploying and expanding upon. And I've got this other idea that I think that you could look at a product like Workday, and Workday's got billions of dollars of revenue, God knows how many designers. I think there's a world in the future where all of Workday could literally be designed by like a single designer. And more than that, I also think that maybe my hotter take is that I think you could argue that Workday would have a better design if it was designed by a single designer, like the single mad genius who owned the entire experience. And I think that we're going to see a lot of that sort of thing happening in the future, like AI giving certain people so much leverage in one straight line dimension that they didn't have before, that you're going to see like massive, massive increases in productivity just centered on like a single genius who needs to have a very, very high amount of judgment, but now has the tools to expand into like exactly the way that you would have had to hire people in the past. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens. It's a little bit of a scary place to be, but I do think that there's a lot of potential for that in very, very specific niche fields.
Yeah, yeah, where you sort of at the point where a designer can almost speak, or articulate, this should do this, and it just is because the software can be built so quickly. And I think if they can speak in that language of whatever black and white will be in the future, whatever that sort of like common design language, if you can use reproducible patterns, the genius is in doing it really fast and picking the places of how to combine them versus necessarily like coming up with the patterns for every different company's design system or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I
Um,
think, yeah, I think and do you have another one you want to do? I think that was a shorter version.
yeah, I think well, I mean, I would say like another one that I just see. I don't know if this like how hot take this is, but like I really do think this AI stuff is gonna max out. Like I know people have said that sort of thing about ChatGPT 5, and then someone says something else about some like DeepSeek benchmark or whatever. And like, I don't know. I'm just gonna say since 4.0, all this stuff has seemed like kind of the same. Like if I really push it to the max on like certain types of like niche coding asks or certain types of like, chain of logic stuff, like maybe I can see some differences, but it's all sort of getting to be within the error bars on these models. And so I will say that it would not shock me if a lot of this stuff is starting to hit diminishing returns, and and actually I think in some ways similar to what happened with like the mobile revolution, where you have like the proliferation of the smartphones and then a broadband, and then it's mainly using technology. If we then go into a mode of essentially deploying and finding applications rather than just like, the God machines are kind of emerging from the computers, and everything starts to like constantly morph and evolve. So I do wonder if that's going to happen, because at least my subjective experience is that we're already kind of seeing those diminishing returns.
Yeah, and you hear people saying, "Oh, if you look at the tests, it's actually gotten better. We've done this, that, and the other." But I think that's where we start to again get in these things where, we're smart people. We know smart people. It's if it just if it's not qualitatively better, every previous revolution in technology, it was both qualitatively and quantitatively better at the same time. It's like, oh, my internet's
Yeah.
faster, my laptop is faster, my phone is smaller. This is one of the first ones where we did that I can recall where we have like a large mismatch between the claims of experts and the claims of people who are really fucking smart, but maybe not like a deeply embedded, sort of industry insider expert. Bitcoin is actually, I think, another one that was like that, where you had people saying it's the money of the future, it's the money of the future. And then people were really smart, but just not Bitcoin maxers saying, I don't know, does it have all the features that I want in my money? Like no one's using it. And it turned out, I think, that in the current world, Bitcoin is not a super heavily transacted currency, and a lot of people are tracking back and saying, "I never said it was going to be like, dollars and cents. I said it was going to be a store of value." And I wonder if we'll see that with AI as well. If there's going to be a little bit of there's already some rewriting, but I think related to that, related to there has to be some kind of slowdown in something. You have like 19 different finance AI companies that are all being funded like they're going to be worth $100 trillion. I think my next level hot take here is I think that there's a greater than 30% chance that the US government nationalizes a core foundational model. And we just get to a place where you say, the chance that China or Russia sinks a fucking $1 trillion into training the next level, whatever the next crazy amount is, and we don't, is too high. But the
Hmm.
economics just, there's no money left. There's no fucking money left. The VCs are tapped. Like they just can't, we can't fund it. And I think that as people start to say, I'm not going to have Cursor and Claude Code and Codex subscriptions for everybody so they can go between them, and everyone has 14 different versions of these tools. I think that there's a very non-trivial chance that we get to a place where the US government says we cannot afford to not have at least one of these companies do the next level of investment, but the dollars it takes is so high and so economically risky that no one can do it without government back support. I'm curious if you think that that's at all likely, but I'm starting to feel like that maybe is what a shoe dropping will look like in the AI sort of bubble, not popping, but deflating.
Yeah, I think that I mean, it has a lot to do with the political climate. Like, obviously, this administration has demonstrated like a willingness to break from tradition in terms of like, nationalizing or taking a stake in companies like Intel. And I also think that on the other side, if we look at the past, in recent administrations from across the aisle, in many cases they've had just like very different opinions, and in some cases, I think fairly extreme opinions around like the role of corporations in society, or at least elements of those parties have. So I think it's a little bit tough to predict, but I think that you're definitely hitting on the right macro level trend that this is an application that, or this is a technology that has very, very clear applications to things like defense and industry and like kind of GDP impacting geopolitical level implications. And it also requires kind of like nation state levels of funding, even right now, just a few years into the wave. And all of that in the past, when we've seen things like that, like the railroads and like, the early steel industries, very quickly, a lot of it starts to get very, very wrapped up into the government because the government is both like the beneficiary that can get the most leverage out of it and also the entity that can fund things appropriately and sort of approach it with the requisite level of scale. And so it doesn't seem crazy. And I think certainly China is probably already doing all of that. And you see some signs that that's probably going on.
Yeah, and you read these stories of like OpenAI giving the US government all like super cheap OpenAI subscriptions, and you just wonder like, is that a medium-term play to convince the government of the value of putting taxpayer dollars in the next whatever version of training the next model that is just too expensive for public markets or something of that, private markets, something like that. Um, so my last hot take on the and I think I don't know we're out of time here, but my last thought here is I'm really very interested to see where the kind of public health domain of AI takes us. And I
Mm.
think my hot take is I think it's probably likely that AI puts more people into states of mental distress than it does put people out of jobs. And the reason I think that, or at least in the short term, is that I look at the mobile phone revolution. It's been great for a ton of things, but I think it's undeniable that the graphs on anxiety and suicide and general well-being of teenagers, socialization, they all absolutely tanked when people started having mobile phones in their pockets. And I think there's a lot of obvious reasons why that is. And I think the wave of mobile technology has been greatly beneficial to society. You have huge new areas of the economy that have opened up. You have people that are connected and able to sort of make sure that the safety of people is greater than it's ever been in many places. I think the trends of crime going down are in some ways related to the rise of mobile as well. Um, but it's been very sort of I don't know, where does that actually end up? Is it positive or is it negative? when it comes to AI, we're already seeing the early signs of pro and con. And in the pro, we're seeing people say, I went to ChatGPT and I diagnosed that I had an issue, and then I went and got surgery and it saved my life. Like we see stories like that. We have personal stories where we've asked ChatGPT about medical advice and have gotten informative, important results. And so I think we're seeing there's some cohort of people who are going to be better off because AI is helping them. I think the tales of living forever are so colossally full of shit that it's unbelievable. But I think that
Hmm.
there are some people that are going to see meaningful medical benefits from AI technology. On the flip side, I think there's a lot of people that are going to go insane from using AI and have ChatGPT psychosis like we're seeing. We're seeing people that are murdering people and killing themselves because ChatGPT and other tools convinced them to do it, or at least didn't convince them not to do it.
Yep.
And then there's all the things that we're not even seeing yet. When it came to mobile, it wasn't immediately obvious in 2016, 2017 that people were like 10% more anxious on average. And how much that was related to sort of like the growing politicization in the world is also a big question. And how much mobile drove that is a big question. So I think that the claims of people going out of work are greatly overstated. I've seen like, David Sachs talk about like he agrees with that. And it's one of the things that I actually strongly agree with him on.
Hmm.
But I also think that we're kind of weirdly like not worried enough about the health implications of AI technology. We had these huge hearings on Facebook and its impact on, teenagers and all, and Zuck had to get up in front of Congress and like apologize to families. And we're seeing these early stories of people losing their mind talking to ChatGPT and killing people and killing themselves. And it just seems like there's not a big enough dialogue. Like everyone who's sort of saying, hey, ChatGPT psychosis is real. They're sort of fringe right now. They're
Yep.
sort of like weird outsiders. And so that's my last hot take is I think that we're really reacting too slowly. We were worried about the world ending 3 years ago from AI, and I think we're starting to see the slow erosion of many pieces of society and just like kind of not worried about it as much as we should be.
Yeah, no, I think that I think it's very true. And I think one of the things that causes this is that you have this weird, I think that you've got this weird kind of asymmetry where probably, probably 90% of the population, let's just call it an even number, 90% can use ChatGPT for anything for the rest of their lives, and it will never cause them to go into some weird sort of insane spiral. And there's probably like 2% of the population where it's like within a year, they're like guaranteed to go into some insane spiral because they've got some pre-existing condition or that's just their personality or what have you. And I think that as a result, everyone, the 90% is just not that worried because it's probably not going to affect them. But the 2% and the other 8% who are maybe on the border, it's like we need to be really concerned about that because like 10% of the population just going completely nuts with this stuff is that's like really, really dangerous. The other thing I'll just say is like, I've used ChatGPT for some stuff that was like kind of nerve-wracking, like some medical issues in the past. And obviously I'm not using it as a doctor, but like, something happens, like your kid has a bad fall, you ask the question, and you can see how the way that you prompt it and like the tone that you bring and the way that you kind of encourage it to follow a conversation you can make it produce anything that you wanted. Like I know for myself, like I know that I get very anxious about like the health of my kids. I'll always frame this in terms of like be very objective, like give me a very like even-handed readout of this situation if I think it could produce something that's gonna like freak me out. But I think but because I know it's like, kind of follow the I want it to follow a certain sort of phrasing and logical chain with me that's going to just like help me get to a good decision. But I think a lot of people don't know to have those guardrails because they just don't understand how this technology works at all. And you can see how you can prompt this stuff to basically throw you into a panic. Like it has the information and the capability to do that with any given prompt. And that's something that's very, very scary because I think as humans, we have like we have absolutely no immune system to that. Like you've got a million years of evolution where every time someone came running up to you, um, screaming that there was some danger going on, it was like real. I mean, we literally have stories like the boy who cried wolf because because crying wolf is something that is like really bad for our society. Like that is like, our form of a defense against this sort of behavior. And these LLMs have nothing like that. And maybe they will in the future, but that probably decreases their utility in some other way. And that's just an ongoing open risk that we have as a society right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic drug problem of, it's sort of like fentanyl is great for surgeries and numbing people and stuff like that. And, it's bad if you use it. And the answer is like, well, don't do that. But, it's sort of,
But it's
it's like
like,
people can't, yeah, you're saying like, people can't defend against it. It's like sort of, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and but like also imagine if like, fentanyl was labeled the same way as Tylenol and it was sold like right next to the Tylenol. Or like even forget the Tylenol. Imagine if it was like labeled like, cereal and it was sold right next to the Cheerios in the grocery store. It's like it's right there. And you're
Yeah.
always like a few words in a prompt from like going down some weird and like crazy rabbit hole because these things are like they're coded to be or they're trained to story they're like kind of agreeable and they're gonna follow you. And whatever you put into them, they're going to follow the trajectory of how you guide them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think maybe the sort of the statement that's been made before is that ChatGPT is like a mirror, and if
Yeah.
you're susceptible and you have problems, then it's going to show you, susceptible, things that you're susceptible to and your problems. And so, if ChatGPT is a mirror, I think some people say that as almost a defense of these tools, of saying like it's just showing you what you are. But I would say if we had an actual problem where mirrors were driving people insane, we would say, hey, should we hold up on giving everyone mirrors? Like maybe that's like something we should
Yeah.
think about who gets them. And so I think that will be something that I think will be a very interesting,
Yeah.
reality. Yeah.
I also just think that mirrors are not a good thing. Like for example, I posted about this the other day. Like I have a tendency to like overthink. I think like very formal emails where I need to be like very cordial, like a certain like a thank you letter to your in-laws, like something like that. And I think GPT is like great for helping you write that sort of thing, right? Because it's very generic. You can pattern match. But every now and then, when I have this thing, like if I'm talking to it about like, oh, how should I phrase this to be like, polite and friendly, but not too formal, but not too whatever, I'll just like say something really crazy to it. I'll just say like, no, like I can't send this to my mother-in-law because, like, I'm not like a hate-filled person or something like that. And these things go right along. And they're like, yeah, you're totally right. That thank you, that like 20-word thank you letter that I helped you draft, that is completely hate-filled and insane. And let's write that in a completely different way. And no human, like it mirrors you, but like no human being would do that if you were talking to them because there's like an objective reality. Someone would be like, dude, what are you talking about? This is like a completely normal thing to write. And the fact that it's just so willing to immediately like give up all sort of grounding. I mean, it's a very dangerous technology. I guess this is why it's so good at like, writing React code though, because it's down to rewrite the whole thing from scratch if you need it to.
Totally. I mean, it's mobile and AI. They're very similar to drugs in many ways. And I think the scary thing is that there was at least some limiting factor on drugs of like you had to go out in the world to get them. And I think that these come right into your house. And so and we're gonna have like the seatbelt conversation all over again, I think. And you're right. It's sort of, I think, putting more safety mechanisms on them will make them less useful. And so, then we get right to the core of what does it mean to be an American and be free. And we don't have time to talk about that today, but I think we
Yeah.
had some really interesting. I'm going to be thinking about some of the stuff you said for a bit. Um, and I think
Likewise.
this is probably just V1 of Stay Sassy Talks AI. So this is a little bit more long-winded version of the podcast. We hope people like it. Please give us feedback if you got all the way to the end here. You're champion. Let us know what you want to hear about next. But I think that is it for episode 3, the Stay Sassy first podcast on AI. Sassy PM. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yep. Thank you. We'll have some more posts soon as well, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks all.